There is a particular kind of cooking that begins with a nearly empty shelf. A little flour, a few potatoes, an onion saved from the bottom of the basket, maybe one piece of meat, or a can opened carefully so nothing inside is wasted. In the kitchens of the Depression years, the question was not how to make a feast look expensive. It was how to make a warm supper feel generous. Today we are walking through 40 scratch preparations built around beans, bread, cornmeal, root vegetables, pantry cans, and small amounts of meat. The practical pattern keeps returning. Stretch the strong ingredient, use the cooking liquid, and let time do some of the work. Keep a pencil nearby. One of these may sound like something your family made, even if the name has changed. And if a familiar dish appears later, tell us what your family called it. The first group begins with the ingredient people notice most quickly: meat. The old answer was not to pretend a little meat was a large roast. It was to let bread, potatoes, milk, gravy, pasta, or a skillet full of vegetables carry it through the meal. A browned crust could make a small portion feel finished. A thick sauce could make the last spoonful worth saving. Together they show a kitchen asking a practical question. Where can flavor go when the main ingredient must travel farther? Ground meat becomes a family supper when breadcrumbs, milk, onion, salt, and pepper are mixed through it. The crumbs hold the juices and give the loaf a tender texture, while the milk keeps the mixture from becoming hard in the oven. Shape it in a loaf pan and bake until cooked through, then let it rest before slicing. The thrift is in the proportion. The meat supplies flavor, while the bread and milk give the loaf body. A thin slice beside potatoes can feel like a complete plate, especially when the pan juices are spooned over everything. The first cut releases a warm, savory smell, and suddenly a modest mixture has the dignity of Sunday dinner. This is a second life for food already cooked. Spread seasoned mashed potato around a baking dish, fill the center with thick leftover stew, creamed chicken, or creamed fish, and cover the top with another layer of potato. The oven heats the filling while the potato browns at the edges. Aunt Sammy's version makes the economy plain. The stew is not discarded, and the potato turns a little filling into a dish that can be served from the center of the table. The top should be lightly browned, with soft gravy underneath. It is the sound of a spoon breaking through a crisp potato lid that makes leftovers feel newly made. Cooked macaroni, a white sauce of flour, butter, milk, and salt, and a modest amount of cheese become a casserole when layered with soft breadcrumbs. The sauce carries the cheese through every forkful, so the dish does not depend on a thick blanket of cheese on top. Bake it until the center is hot and the crumbs are brown. Aunt Sammy's recipe also allows broken spaghetti, a useful reminder that the pantry did not have to be perfectly stocked. The savings come from letting flour and milk build the sauce around the cheese. When the dish reaches the table, the browned crumbs give way to a soft, steaming middle. Cut the chicken into serving pieces, roll it in flour, and brown it in hot fat before covering it with water and simmering until tender. The chicken comes out while the dumplings cook in the gravy. Flour, baking powder, salt, egg, and milk are mixed into a dough and dropped by spoonfuls into the bubbling liquid. The lid stays closed while the dumplings steam, because escaping steam makes them heavy. This is a patient way to make a small bird serve a table. The gravy becomes part of the meal, and the dumplings absorb its flavor. The platter arrives with chicken in the middle, dumplings around it, and gravy flowing over both. Flaked canned salmon can be folded with cooked potato and breadcrumbs, then shaped into cakes and browned in a skillet. A little onion or seasoning gives the mixture a savory edge, but the potato is doing the quiet work of making the fish go farther. Keep the cakes thick enough to hold together and turn them only after the first side has formed a crust. The outside is crisp, the inside soft, and the scent is halfway between supper and the sea. Thin dried beef is rinsed, cut, and folded into a simple milk gravy thickened with flour and butter. Spoon it over toast, using the bread as the part that turns a small amount of topping into a full plate. The saltiness of the beef is softened by the milk, and the toast gives the sauce somewhere to go. It belongs to the old family of economical cream sauces. A strong ingredient is diluted into something warm and filling. That is the quiet logic of the white saucepan, where flour, milk, and heat make a little food feel substantial. Hoover stew, named, not kindly, for the president many blamed for the hard times, was a simple pot of macaroni, canned vegetables, and sliced hot dogs. Cook the macaroni, warm the vegetables with their liquid, and add the sliced meat so the flavors meet in one pot. Its thrift is visible: one starchy base, one can or two from the shelf, and a small amount of meat spread through the whole pot. It is the kind of supper that smells better after resting for a few minutes, when the macaroni has taken on the tomato and vegetable broth. Slice potatoes thinly and cook them in a skillet until tender and browned. Then add sliced hot dogs so their edges take on color. Salt and onion are enough to give the pan a complete character. The potatoes provide the bulk, while the meat is cut small and distributed rather than served as a single large portion. It is the plain beauty of the skillet method: one pan, one starch, one strong flavor, and very little washing up. When the potatoes begin to crisp, the kitchen smells of browned edges and hot fat. It is immediate, warm, and easy to put in the middle of a crowded table. Boil onions until tender, slice them, and layer them in a baking dish with a thin white sauce and ground peanuts. Finish with buttered crumbs and bake until golden. Aunt Sammy's recipe uses peanuts as a savory, nutty layer, not as a sweet treat. The sauce connects the onions and keeps the casserole moist, while the crumbs supply a browned top. It is economical because onions provide the volume and peanuts add a concentrated flavor and protein-like richness. The finished dish is mild at first bite, then sweeter as the onions soften. It is a good reminder that an inexpensive vegetable can be made the center of the table with careful cooking. After the meat dishes come the foods that built the middle of the plate. Beans brought softness and substance after a long simmer. Onions and cabbage changed character when they met heat. Root vegetables became sweeter when browned. The point was not to disguise vegetables as something else. It was to treat them as ingredients with enough character to deserve attention. The recipes in this group move from pot to skillet to baking dish, but the method remains steady. Use what holds well, cook it carefully, and let texture make a simple ingredient satisfying. Soak and cook the beans until tender, saving some of their cooking liquid. Stir them with chopped onion, a little bacon, brown sugar, mustard, and molasses, then bake slowly until the top darkens and the liquid thickens. Aunt Sammy's baked bean preparation shows how a humble dried bean can carry a whole dish. Time softens it, the saved liquid keeps it moist, and a small amount of bacon perfumes the pot. The sweet and smoky smell reaches the kitchen before the beans are ready. Serve them from the baking dish, where the darker beans at the top meet the softer ones underneath. Dried navy beans become soup by soaking, simmering, and sharing their starch with the broth. Add onion, salt, and a little seasoning. If ham or bacon is available, it can flavor the pot without becoming the whole meal. Dry beans expand in water and make their own thickening as they cook. The finished soup should be soft enough to spoon, with a broth that clings lightly to the beans. It is slow food in the most practical sense. The stove does the work while the household moves around it. Mix cornmeal with flour or a little leavening, salt, milk or water, and fat, then bake it until the top is firm and golden. Break the cornbread into a bowl beside cooked beans, or let the beans' broth soak into the crumb. The cornmeal gives the meal a sturdy grain base, while the beans provide the soft, savory center. It is also a lesson in texture: crisp edges, tender middle, creamy beans, and broth caught in the cracks. Nothing needs to be decorated. A warm square lifted from the pan can make a pot of beans feel complete. Drain canned corn, but keep the liquid. Combine that liquid or milk with flour, baking powder, salt, a beaten egg, the corn, and a little melted fat. Drop spoonfuls into hot fat and cook slowly enough for the center to set before the outside becomes too dark. Aunt Sammy's recipe makes the clever part explicit. The corn liquid is not poured away, it becomes part of the batter. The fritters are small, so 1 cup of corn can be divided across many pieces. Drain them well and serve hot. The first bite gives a crisp shell, a tender center, and the sweet little pop of corn. Scrub parsnips, boil them until tender, scrape away the skin, and split them lengthwise. Remove the stringy core, dip the pieces in flour, and fry them in fat until golden. Aunt Sammy's method uses the root twice. Boiling makes it tender, and the final frying gives it a browned surface. The flour is not a thick coating, it is just enough to help the fat cling and the edges color. This is a useful way to make a root vegetable feel more festive without adding a complicated sauce. The parsnip's sweetness comes forward as it browns, and the crisp outside makes the soft center taste almost like a different vegetable. Simmer potatoes with onion in water until tender, then mash some of them into the liquid to thicken the soup. Milk can be added near the end for a softer, creamier bowl, with flour or butter used sparingly if the household has them. The potato provides starch, body, and a satisfying mouthful. Keep a few pieces whole so the bowl has texture, steam rises from the surface, and the smell of onion and warm milk can make an ordinary supper feel gentle. Wash young dandelion leaves or other wild greens carefully, trim the tough parts, and cook them until tender. They can be served with a little bacon fat, vinegar, or onion, depending on the household's pantry. The thrift is the use of a local plant that does not depend on a full market basket. The flavor can be pleasantly bitter, especially when balanced with fat or vinegar. A bowl of greens is a taste of spring at the edge of the table, with the reminder that nourishment sometimes came from just beyond the garden. Shred cabbage and cook it slowly in a skillet with onion and a little fat until the edges soften and begin to brown. Salt is enough for a plain version. A small piece of bacon can season the whole pan if one is available. Cabbage supplies both volume and a sweet flavor as it cooks down. Stir occasionally, but let some leaves rest against the hot pan so they color. The result is tender, slightly crisp, and fragrant in a way raw cabbage is not. A full skillet comes from one sturdy head, and the last browned leaves are always the ones people reach for first. Bread and cornmeal were more than side dishes. They were ways to turn liquid, grain, and yesterday's leftovers into something that could be sliced, toasted, steamed, or fried. A tin could serve as a mold. A griddle could give a soft batter a browned edge. A loaf that crumbled could still be cut with string. These are small engineering decisions, but they matter in a kitchen where nothing is casually thrown away. This group is about transformation, not buying a new ingredient, but giving an old one a new shape and a fresh moment at the table. Mix cornmeal, rye meal, whole wheat flour, salt, molasses, and sour milk with baking soda, then pour the batter into a greased tin or mold. Cover it and steam it for several hours before drying the loaf in the oven. Aunt Sammy's directions even suggest using a clean string to cut the loaf if it tends to crumble. The bread is economical because several grains share the work, and steaming makes a moist loaf without requiring a large quantity of fat. Molasses gives it a deep sweetness. When the cover lifts, the loaf is dark, warm, and humble-looking, but a slice beside beans can hold a whole supper together. Tear stale bread into a baking dish and moisten it with milk, beaten egg, sugar, and whatever restrained seasoning the pantry offers. Bake until the center sets and the top turns lightly brown. Bread that has lost its freshness becomes the structure of a pudding, and milk and egg turn it tender. Raisins can be scattered through it when available. The edges bake into a little crust, while the middle stays soft enough to tremble when the spoon touches the dish. Cook cornmeal with water and salt until thick. Pour it into a shallow pan and let it cool until firm. Slice the set mush and fry the pieces in a little fat until the edges are crisp. One pot of porridge does double duty, soft when freshly cooked, sliceable and brown the next day. That is the thrift and also the pleasure. The outside becomes golden while the center stays creamy. Serve it plain, with milk or beside beans according to the pantry. It turns yesterday's soft supper into today's skillet breakfast. Toast slices of bread and pour warm milk over them, adding a little salt, sugar, or butter when available. It is a soft, filling bread and milk meal made from what is already in the kitchen. There is no elaborate sauce to prepare. The toast gives the milk a toasted flavor, and the milk softens the bread without making it disappear. It works as a light supper or a soothing breakfast. The best bite is the one where the top still holds a little crispness, while the bottom has become tender and warm. Stir cornmeal with water or milk, salt, and a little fat, then cook the batter on a hot griddle until the cakes are browned on both sides. Cornmeal makes the cake substantial, and the griddle turns a few pantry ingredients into something that can be carried to the table hot. Eat it beside beans, vegetables, or a little syrup when the household has it. The surface crackles as it cools, and the smell of toasted corn makes the kitchen feel awake. Dessert is where the pantry's limitations become most visible, and where ingenuity can feel most generous. Fruit may be missing, but spice can still suggest it. Milk may be scarce, but water, sugar, flour, and a little butter can become a pie filling. A stale loaf can become pudding. A whole apple can be wrapped in pastry so that one piece of fruit feels like a complete occasion. Combine flour, sugar, cocoa, baking soda, vinegar, water, and fat in the simple scratch style associated with depression cake. The vinegar and baking soda provide the lift without eggs or milk, and the finished cake is baked in a plain pan. A tender chocolate cake can come from a nearly empty refrigerator. It is a clever bit of pantry chemistry. The cocoa smell rises first, followed by the warm, slightly tangy sweetness of a cake that needed no frosting to feel special. Line a pie shell, then build the filling from water, sugar, flour or starch, butter, and a little flavoring. The filling is transformed by the oven into a sweet, set custard-like layer. It is often called a desperation pie, but the cooking itself is more precise than the name suggests. The ingredients must be mixed carefully, and the pie must cool before slicing. Water is the main liquid, while butter and sugar provide richness and flavor. The finished slice is pale, glossy, and unexpectedly soft. It is the kind of dessert that invites a second look before the first forkful. Prepare a pastry shell and make a sweet filling with sugar, water, butter, flour or eggs, and a small amount of vinegar. The vinegar supplies a bright note that can stand in for the sharper flavor of fruit when fruit is scarce. Bake until the filling sets, then let the pie cool so the slices hold. The aroma is warm sugar with a faint tang. It sounds strange until the first bite explains it. Sweet at the front, lively at the finish, and made from ordinary pantry things. Mock apple pie uses crackers, sugar, spices, butter, and a pastry crust to imitate the texture and flavor of an apple filling. The crackers are softened in spiced syrup, enclosed in pastry, and baked until the crust browns. The thrift is obvious when apples are absent, but a sweet pie is still wanted. Cinnamon carries much of the memory. When the knife passes through the crust, the filling looks familiar for a moment, and then the first bite reveals the old kitchen trick. Fold tomato soup into a scratch cake batter with flour, sugar, fat, spices, and leavening. The soup supplies moisture and color, while cinnamon or other warm spices guide the flavor toward a spice cake rather than a savory loaf. The thrift lies in using a pantry can as part of the liquid and flavor structure. The finished cake is fragrant, dark, and soft. It is the kind of recipe that makes a child suspicious at the name and quiet at the first bite. Roll pastry thin, place a whole cored apple in each round, sprinkle it with sugar, dot it with butter, and bring the pastry up around the fruit. Bake until the apple is tender, then serve it hot with hard sauce made from butter, powdered sugar, vanilla, and nutmeg. Aunt Sammy's directions give the dumpling and the sauce as a pair. The apple remains whole inside its little pastry bundle, so one fruit becomes a complete dessert rather than a garnish. The best moment is when the crust opens and steam escapes from the apple. Cold, hard sauce softens against the heat and melts into the folds. Beat eggs with sugar, sour cream, finely cut seeded raisins, cinnamon, cloves, salt, and vinegar. Pour the mixture into a pastry-lined pie pan, cover it with a top crust, and bake until golden. Aunt Sammy's recipe uses sour cream and raisins to create richness and fruit flavor without a large amount of fresh fruit. The vinegar sharpens the filling, while the spices make the kitchen smell like a holiday table. It is economical because raisins keep well, and a sour dairy ingredient can become the center of a dessert. The first slice has a soft, fragrant middle dotted with raisins, held in a crust that breaks cleanly at the edge. Build a simple cake or steamed pudding around flour, sugar, a modest amount of fat, and pantry fruit or spice when available. A little sweetener and a little fat turn a basic grain mixture into a dessert that can be portioned for a household. Steam or bake it until set, then serve it warm. The texture is soft and close, the sweetness restrained, and the comfort comes from eating dessert while the ingredients are still ordinary. Rice pudding stretches cooked rice with milk, sugar, and a little egg or spice. Cornstarch custard thickens milk with sugar and flavoring when rice is not available. Fresh farmer cheese can be folded into a simple sweet dish when dairy is the ingredient on hand. Use a basic staple as the body of the dessert, Then let milk, sugar, or egg make it tender. One is creamy, one softly set, one pleasantly fresh. All make the pantry feel more generous than it looked. The last savory dishes return to the quiet work of the soup pot and the skillet. A few cooked vegetables can become a milk soup. An onion can make broth smell deep and sweet. Dried peas can soften while the stove fills the room with a steady, earthy warmth. These are foods that ask for patience more than abundance, and they make use of the pieces that might otherwise sit alone in a bowl or on a plate. Cooked vegetables become a gentle soup when they are chopped, mashed, or strained into milk, lightly thickened with flour and butter. Use the vegetables that are already tender: peas, beans, celery, potatoes, turnips, carrots, spinach, onions, corn, or cabbage, and let their colors and flavors meet in the pot. Aunt Sammy's recipe keeps the method simple. Make the milk into a thin, white sauce, then add the vegetables and thin it when their starch makes the bowl too thick. It is economical because yesterday's vegetables become today's first course, with no need for a separate stock. The spoon moves through the soup softly, and the smell of warm milk and onion makes the kitchen feel cared for. Cook chopped onions in a little water until tender. Then let them turn golden in fat before adding meat broth, salt, pepper, and a flour thickener. Pour the soup into bowls, set a round of toast on top, and finish with grated parmesan. Aunt Sammy's recipe lets the onions carry the flavor, while the broth gives the bowl its depth. The toast catches the savory liquid at the surface, and the cheese melts into the edges where bread meets soup. It is a meal built from a few quiet ingredients, but the first spoonful carries the sweetness of softened onion and the comfort of something hot held in both hands. Rinse dried split peas and simmer them slowly with onion, water, or broth, and a little seasoning until they soften into a thick green-gold soup. A small piece of ham or bacon can flavor the pot when it is available, but the peas provide the body. Stir as they break down, adding water if the soup becomes too tight. The Thrift is in the way a dried pantry grain turns into a satisfying bowl through time and heat. Steam gathers on the window while the peas lose their sharp shape and become soft enough to follow the spoon. It tastes earthy, warm, and steady, the kind of supper that settles a household before the dishes are washed. Hard-cook the eggs, slice them, and fold them into a white sauce made from milk, flour, butter, salt, and pepper. Spoon the warm mixture over toast so the bread catches the sauce and gives the eggs a larger place on the plate. The eggs bring richness, while the milk and flour make that richness reach farther. It is a dish for the morning after a quiet pantry night. Pale sauce, tender whites, golden yolks, and toast soft at the center with crisp edges still showing. The whole plate feels gentle, especially when the steam rises and someone tears the first piece of toast with a fork. Chop leftover meat and cold potatoes into small, even pieces, then cook them together in a hot skillet with onion and a little fat. Press the mixture down so the bottom can brown before turning it in sections. The potatoes give the hash its bulk, while the meat supplies the savory pieces that appear in every few bites. This is not a dish that needs a new centerpiece. It gives yesterday's supper a browned surface and a fresh smell. The best part is the contrast between the crisp underside and the soft potato inside, with a small piece of meat catching the edge of the pan. Warm canned tomatoes with onion, salt, and a little butter or fat. Then fold in cubes of stale bread and let them soften in the tomato juice. The bread absorbs the bright liquid and turns a thin vegetable dish into something that can be spooned beside beans, eggs, or meat. Stir gently so some pieces disappear into the sauce while others keep their shape. The Thrift is plain, the can gives the dish its moisture, and old bread gives it body. The bowl arrives red and fragrant, with a soft center and a few edges that still hold a little chew. It tastes like a pantry making room for one more supper. The final sweets keep the oven working with eggs, milk, sugar, fruit, nuts, and breadcrumbs. Some are delicate enough to tremble in a cup. Others are sturdy squares meant to be carried to a neighbor or packed beside a lunch. A little caramel, a handful of dates, or a few raisins can change the feeling of an ordinary afternoon. The sweetness is modest, but the act of setting something warm on the table never is. Warm milk with sugar, salt, and caramel syrup until the syrup dissolves completely, then pour it into lightly beaten eggs with vanilla. Add a small piece of butter to each custard cup and bake the cups in a pan surrounded by water until the center is set. Aunt Sammy's recipe also explains how to make the caramel syrup by melting sugar slowly in a heavy skillet and stirring until it becomes a deep brown syrup. The ingredients are simple, but the method asks for a calm hand. Served warm or cold, the custard is smooth and pale beneath its caramel scent, the kind of dessert that makes a quiet kitchen feel briefly dressed for company. Mix butter and sugar with beaten eggs and milk, then fold in flour, baking powder, salt, vanilla, chopped dates, and nuts. Coat the dates and nuts lightly with flour before they go into the batter, so they stay scattered through the pudding. Bake it slowly in a shallow pan until the center is set, then cut it into squares and serve it warm, with whipped cream when there is some to spare. Aunt Sammy's recipe lets the dates provide the deep, sticky sweetness, while the nuts give the soft pudding a little resistance. The smell is brown sugar and fruit, and each square feels dense enough to be shared carefully. Cream butter with light brown sugar. Add beaten eggs, then mix in flour, salt, cinnamon, raisins, walnuts, and a little soda. Roll the fruit and nuts in flour before folding them through the dough, then place small spoonfuls on a greased pan and bake until the edges are firm. Aunt Sammy's recipe calls them rocks, but they are not hard little stones. They are rough, craggy cookies with a tender middle hidden under raisins and walnut pieces. The dough is portioned by the teaspoon, so the same bowl can send many small cookies onto the pan. They smell of cinnamon as they cool, and children learn to wait by counting the warm ones on the rack. Layer sliced apples with breadcrumbs, sugar, cinnamon, and small pieces of butter. Then bake until the fruit softens and the crumbs become browned and fragrant. Stale bread is the quiet structure of the dish, catching the apple juices instead of being left to dry on the counter. The apples shrink into the crumbs as they cook, so a modest amount of fruit can become a spoonful of dessert for the table. It comes from the oven with a crisp cinnamon-scented top and a soft layer underneath. Served warm, it tastes like baked apples and toast together, a simple ending that makes yesterday's bread feel welcome again. Across these kitchens, thrift was rarely one dramatic trick. It was a chain of small decisions: save the cooking liquid, brown the root vegetable, give stale bread another form, let flour carry a sauce, and let a long simmer soften what could not be bought tender. That is a cooking language built around making do. Which one did your family make, and what did they call it? Tell us below. If these old kitchen skills are worth keeping, subscribe so these stories are